She cheated and left me for my best friend. She had no idea I was secretly making $500, $0 a year. Hello, everyone. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now let's begin the video. Using a throwaway for obvious reasons with certain specifics modified to preserve anonymity. She cheated and walked out on me for my best friend without a clue that I'd been quietly making $500,000 a year. I remember all too well the exact moment decided to tear apart our marriage. She was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone like she had nothing on her mind while I had just come in from work, ready to set down my bag and relax. Then she looked up and casually said, "I want a divorce." No warning, no gentle explanation, just a cold, blunt statement like she was commenting on the weather. I froze for a moment, unsure if I'd heard her right. "Excuse me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. She repeated herself, sounding annoyed that I hadn't understood the first time, like I was slow on the uptake. Instead of feeling angry or devastated, I was stunned by her incredible nerve. "Divorce," she said again after everything we'd been through, all the memories, all the promises. And the thing that hit me the hardest was that I couldn't live like this anymore. She crossed her arms and added, "I need someone who actually works, who contributes. This isn't the life I signed up for." I blinked, wondering what she was talking about. She claimed I didn't work, that I barely made it through each day. I wanted to laugh but kept my composure. For years, I'd built my career from nothing, earning a six-figure salary and setting us up for a future most folks could only dream about. But she never once asked how I earned my money, never showed the slightest interest. They just assumed I was coasting, barely getting by. I leaned against the counter, studying her, so sure of herself, so confident that she was making the right call. I just said, "All right," and set my bag down. She tilted her head, surprised. "All right," she repeated as if I was a little slow myself. "Yeah, if you want a divorce, I won't stop you," I said plainly. For a moment I saw some flicker of doubt cross her face. Maybe she realized I was serious. But then she quickly masked it with that smug smirk she wore so well. "Good. I've already talked to a lawyer. You'll need to move out by the end of the month, out of my house." The audacity of her was almost laughable, but I didn't argue. If she wanted me gone, I'd leave, at least for now. "Fair enough," I muttered and headed upstairs. I could feel her eyes on me, waiting for me to explode or beg her to stay, but I gave her nothing. In the privacy of our bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and let everything sink in. This wasn't just about divorce. It was about power. Wanted to be in control, to paint me as the failure, and maybe she thought she could guilt me into begging her to come back. But she didn't know me as well as she thought. The following days were in passive-aggressive tactics on her part. Suddenly had a lot to say about how I folded laundry, how I spent my evenings, even how I brewed my coffee. She criticized my hobbies, my habits. It was as if she was justifying her decision by turning me into the villain. And then there was her so-called best friend. At first, I paid no mind to how often she mentioned his name, said this, or suggested that. But soon it became painfully obvious he was more than just a friend. I didn't confront her yet. I was waiting, letting her think she was in control, assuming the clueless, passive husband role. One evening, while I was packing a suitcase with a few essentials, her formalities, I felt her presence. Leaned against the doorframe with her arms crossed and a sly smile. "So, have you figured out where you're going to stay?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. I zipped up the bag, turned to face her, and softly said, "Don't worry about me, I'll be just fine." She looked surprised. "Good," she snapped. "Because and I are planning a dinner party here next weekend. It'd be awkward if you were still hanging around my house, my guest, my best friend." The nerve of her almost impressed me. I shrugged and carried my bag. "Don't worry, I'll be gone long before that." As I moved past her, I caught her smug smile. She thought she'd won. She believed I was slinking away defeated. But what she didn't realize was that she just handed me the match to set the fuse on her own destruction. If she wanted to burn everything down, I was going to let her, and I'd sit back and watch the flames consume her and alike. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't shouting or fighting. It's silence, patience, and letting the other person dig their own grave while you prepare to bury them. And let me tell you, I was just getting started. Betrayal, I learned, is a sneaky thing that doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It sneaks in, disguised as casual chats and innocent gestures, until one day you wake up and realize everything you thought was solid has been chipped away. His request for a divorce was the first crack. What followed was the slow crumble of everything I thought I knew about her and my so-called best friend. I should seen it coming, but hindsight is a cruel game. At first it was subtle, words about became more frequent, casual mentions like said this, or recommended that. Over dinner I'd nod without much thought, after all he was close to both of us. But then his name started slipping into our conversations with a strange warmth that twisted my stomach. And the first real red flag. It was a Saturday afternoon, just came back from lunch with him. She was laughing, cheeks flushed, in a way I hadn't seen in years. When I asked what was so funny, she waved me off dismissively. "Oh, it's just something said," she said, brushing it off like it was nothing. "You wouldn't get it." That realization hit me hard, the outsider looking in. The earlier signs had been there all along, I just refused to see them. I started noticing text messages, sly smiles when she quickly locked her phone, how she dressed up more whenever she had plans with, the endless excuses about them just being friends, or how I was overthinking. That word, overthinking, became the favorite of every guilty person desperately trying to shift blame. Still, I didn't confront her. Why bother? She'd only deny it, spin some story to make me look paranoid, so I played along, pretending not to see what was happening right under my nose. One night the truth hit hard, showed up at my house uninvited. I was in the middle of packing, trying to fit everything into suitcases, while leaned against the doorframe with her arms crossed, that same smug smile on her face. "So have you figured out where you're going to stay?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension. I zipped up the bag and simply responded, "Don't worry about me, I'll be just fine." She looked hurt, surprised, and annoyed. "Good," she snapped. "Because and I are having a dinner party next weekend. It'd be weird if you were still around my house, my best friend, I cut her off. "I'll be gone long before then." I turned and headed upstairs, feeling her eyes on me, waiting, expecting me to break or plead. But I didn't. In the privacy of my room, I sat on the bed and let the weight of it all settle. In the betrayal, the lies, the cruelty. This wasn't just about divorce, it was about power, control. Wanted to be the one pulling the strings, to paint me as the villain, and maybe she thought she could guilt me into fighting for her. But she didn't know me as well as she thought. The days that followed, a living lesson in passive resistance. Suddenly had an opinion on everything. How I folded laundry, what I did in the evenings, even how I brewed my coffee. She criticized my hobbies, my habits, everything. It was as if she was justifying her decision by turning me into the villain. But then there was my so-called best friend. It became obvious he was more than friend, like he was prowling around, waiting for the right moment. One evening I started packing again and he arrived, grinning like we were still best pals. "My man," he said, strolling in without waiting for an invite. "How's it going?" I stared at him, holding back my frustration. "What do you want?" I asked calmly. He leaned against the wall, trying to seem relaxed. "Just checking in. Told me you're moving out, needed to see if you need any help." Help? From the guy who'd been sleeping with my wife behind my back. The audacity of him was almost impressive. "Got it handled," I said curtly, turning back to pack. But I couldn't help but notice the wheels turning in his head. He wasn't just here to check on me, he was here to rub it in, to stake his claim. "Listen," he said, trying to sound sincere, "I know this must be tough, but things happen, you know. Life's unpredictable." I turned to face him, stepping closer slowly, staring him in the eyes. "Yeah, things happen, and sometimes they come back to bite you." That threw him off. His confident smirk faltered, uncertainty flickering across his face. I didn't wait for him to recover. I turned back to my suitcase, dismissing him altogether. "You've always been a cool guy," he mumbled awkwardly as he headed for the door. "No hard feelings, right?" I didn't answer. Silence can be a weapon, especially when someone desperately wants a reaction. Left without another word, and as his car disappeared down the street, I exhaled. The tension. I hadn't realized I'd been holding finally released. That night, lying in the bed that soon wouldn't be mine, I replayed the past few months, the signals I'd missed, the lies, the betrayal. I could have gotten angry, confronted them both, demanded answers. But what good would that do? They'd already dismissed me, just a footnote. What they didn't see was that I'd been paying close attention. I'd been planning my next move all along. If and thought they could sneak away into their little blurred dream of happiness without consequences, they were in for a rude awakening. Because betrayal, it doesn't end with the reveal. That's when the real game begins, and I was ready to win. Divorce, it's such a small word for something so messy. It sounds final, like a clean break. But walking into that courtroom, I realized this wasn't an ending for her. It was a victory lap, a celebration of her supposed upgrade. Came looking sharp, dressed in a tailored dress that screamed sophistication, grinning like she'd conquered something. And right behind her lurked, hiding in the shadows, practically invisible. Of course, he didn't step into the courtroom, he wouldn't dare. But his presence just. The fact that he was there told me everything I needed to know. Wasn't just divorcing me, she was flaunting her betrayal like a badge of honor. "Let's not drag this out," she said as we sat across from each other at the negotiation table. "I don't want this to be any harder than it has to be." The irony hit me hard. She'd already made this mess, trampling on years of marriage as if it was worn-out fabric she couldn't wait to toss. I kept my tone even. "I don't plan to drag it out," I said flatly. The lawyer laid out her demands: house, furniture, a share of what she called my meager savings. She probably thought I'd fight, maybe even beg her for more, but I did nothing. I signed everything without hesitation, blinked at me confused. "You're okay with all this?" "Why not?" I asked with a light tone. "It's just stuff." I saw a flicker of doubt flash across her face, but she masked it quickly. She thought she'd won. Thought she'd walk away with everything that mattered. But she didn't know those assets. The house wasn't even mine. Originally, it was a rental under my name I'd used when I first started freelancing years ago. The savings she thought she was taking, a tiny part of a mountain of wealth stored elsewhere, hidden in accounts she didn't even know about. As the papers signed and the process finished, leaned back satisfied. "Glad we could handle this like adults," she said, sounding patronizing. I simply nodded, biting back the urge to laugh. A week later, I packed up what was mine and left, the house she desperately wanted. I left her everything she asked for: furniture, decorations, those fancy kitchen gadgets she never used. It wasn't worth the trouble to take it all. Let her have her spoils. He wasted no time moving in. Photo from a neighbor showed him unloading boxes with smug face on the porch. They thought they were building their perfect life, oblivious to the storm brewing just beyond their view. What didn't realize was that I'd already started gathering evidence of her affair with months before the divorce papers were filed. Photos, messages, even a GPS history proving their frequent hotel lunches. I could use it all to blow up her case in court, but I chose not to. Why drag it out and prolong the drama? I wanted karma to do its work, and I wanted to be there front row when it finally hit. In the weeks that followed, I settled into my new life. My career took off deal after deal, raising my income to over $533 a year. I wasn't just doing well, I was thriving. Quietly, I kept my success on the down low. Had already dismissed me as the man who didn't work. Why correct her? Her ignorance was working in my favor. Instead, I poured my energy inward, upgrading my apartment to a sleek, modern penthouse in the city center. Floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture, a breathtaking view of the skyline. My new home was a symbol of my hard-won progress. Stripped from the bitterness and betrayal of the past, I filled my days with meetings, projects, opportunities. My nights. I reconnected with old friends, made new ones, enjoyed the freedom to live lighter, freer, and more fulfilled. Of course, every now and then I'd get an update from mutual friends about and struggles. The unpaid bills, the fights, the mounting debt. They even threw a dinner party at the rental, only to have the power cut mid-evening because they'd neglected the utility bills. One friend laughed and told me, tried to play it off like a mistake, but everyone knew what was really going on. I didn't laugh, I just nodded, feeling a calm satisfaction. This wasn't about petty victory or rubbing their failures in their faces. It was about balance. They had tipped the scales with betrayal, and now life was evening things out. One day, I ran into at a coffee shop. The guy looked terrible, haggard, out of sorts. His once sharp, confident demeanor was gone, replaced by exhaustion and stress. He didn't see me at first, so I had a moment to observe. He hunched over his laptop, scrolling through job ads, clearly desperate. When he finally looked up and saw me, the smile was gone. No bravado, no smugness, just awkwardness. He muttered, standing unsteadily. I responded coolly, "How's it going?" He hesitated, eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. "Good, busy with work." "Work, huh?" I raised an eyebrow. "That's good." He chuckled nervously, but it was hollow. "Yeah, staying busy, you know how it is." I let the silence grow thick between us. He shifted uncomfortably before mumbling something about getting back to his things, then hurried out. That little encounter told me everything I needed to know. Was struggling and so-called perfect new life. Not so perfect. Over the next few weeks, her messages became more frequent, simple checks. "How are you doing?" Or "Hope you're well." I knew what she was really after, testing the waters, trying to see if I'd reach out to help. I ignored most, responding only briefly when I did. Her replies, mostly vague, almost desperate. "I know we have our issues, but I could really use a friend right now." Friend, the irony stung. She'd thrown me aside like trash, and now that her shiny new life was crumbling, she wanted a favor. I didn't reply, not out of spite, but because I owed her nothing. Choices had consequences, and I was letting her live through them. My silence echoed louder than any words I could have offered. While they floundered, I ascended. Opportunities flooded in, and my investment accounts kept growing. I didn't need to confront them. Victory was in my quiet confidence. Every ignored message, every rumor of my success, every time I walked away with my head held high, those were my triumphs. This wasn't about revenge. It was about proving to myself I could rise above the betrayal and the wreckage. Their carefully constructed fantasy life, crumbling piece by piece. Mutual friends started noticing the subtle signs: fewer fancy dinners, bland vacations, forced smiles in pictures. Gossip turned into truths. Once impeccable hair and designer clothes gave way to cheaper alternatives, was recycling outfits at best. Rumors grew: she was behind on rent, they were in trouble, and their perfect life was just a house of cards. Eventually, a cousin called me, barely able to contain her laughter. "You won't believe this, been texting someone else. Caught him, and it got ugly." I couldn't help but laugh myself. "Someone else? Are you serious?" She confirmed it, some young girl from his new job. The irony, thick enough to taste, was betraying her just as he'd betrayed me, and karma. It didn't just catch up, it hit like a tidal wave. She confronted him publicly, screaming in a cafe, throwing her coffee, and she looked devastated. He tried to brush it off, but it was clear their house of cards was collapsing. His big mistake, trusting a man who had no substance, just show. Stupidity ices her out. He thought she was a trophy worth risking everything. And she didn't take it quietly. She demanded answers, yelled for him to fix it. But he doubled down, blaming her for money troubles, arguing they just hit a rough patch. They fought late into the night. Neighbors overheard the shouting. It was only a matter of time before he left, leaving in that tiny, dingy apartment, broke, alone, and with nowhere to turn. She called me again, her voice trembling with anger and regret. "You were right, a liar, a cheat. I can't believe I trusted him." I leaned back, silent, letting her vent. She thought she could run to me for help. I coolly replied, "You made your choice. You left me for thinking he was better. How's that working for you?" Long pause. I could hear her breathing, heavy and frustrated. Then she finally muttered, "I need your help." "Help?" I shook my head. "What you need is to accept the consequences of your choices," I said simply. She hung up. A week later, she and were evicted. The landlord gave them a final deadline. They couldn't pay. She told me over the phone, heard there on the street now, living in a tiny apartment, behind on everything. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Their downfall wasn't about me. It was about the choices they made. Had traded stability for a fantasy she couldn't hold up, and well, he was just reaping what he'd sown. The most telling sign, I ran into at a grocery store. She looked worn down, tired, defeated, her polished look gone. She saw me and froze. she whispered, voice unsteady. I said neutrally. She was fumbling to say something, but no words came. Just defeat. The woman who'd once demanded a divorce, flaunted her affair, and looked invincible, vanished. I hope you're doing okay, I said softly. She nodded quickly and hurried away, her head down. Watching her walk off, I felt a weird mixture, satisfaction, yes, but also pity. She'd created this life, fought for it, and now she was trapped in it. She was living the consequences. I didn't need to say anything. Life had already done it for me. And as I left that store, I realized something profound. Sometimes karma doesn't need a shove. It just needs patience. It slowly, silently does its work. It wasn't long before everything exploded. It was inevitable. People they never handle consequences well. When their illusion of success starts to crack, they lash out, looking for someone to blame or save them. One morning, right after a client call, my phone lit up, an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, then answered. Came her trembling voice. "We need to talk." I leaned back. "About what?" There was a pause, then she finally said, "I don't know how to say this, but we're struggling, and can you help?" I sighed. "I can't help. You left me for thinking he was the next best thing. Now you want me to fix the mess. Sorry, I won't." Another pause. "Please, just this once. You don't have to make a big deal out of it." I let her plead in silence. There was nothing left to say. She made her choices, and now she had to live with them. I hung up. A week later, I got the word they'd been evicted. The landlord had finally kicked them out after months of unpaid rent. Now squeezed herself into a rundown apartment on the outskirts of town. A mutual friend told me, "You should see it. It's nothing like her glam life's barely holding it together, and he looks 10 years older." I didn't gloat. No need. Their downfall was about their own actions, not mine. Had traded her shot at stability for a fantasy she couldn't sustain. He just reaped what he'd sown. The ultimate sign. I ran into in a grocery store again. She looked exhausted, eyes downcast, defeated. She saw me, froze, then quickly looked away. She whispered. I said evenly, "How are you?" She started to say something, opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her confidence, her swagger gone. She was just a woman defeated, trapped in her own choices. I wished her nothing but the best. I told her, "Take care," and left her there, walking away with a strange sense of closure, satisfaction mixed with pity. Sometimes karma doesn't need to be loud, it just needs time. When it finally strikes, it hits hard, and then they couldn't handle it. When their world fell apart, they blamed each other and looked for someone else to save them. But I was already moving forward, my life better than ever. And the truth, I didn't need anyone's validation. I'd built a new life, stronger, happier, fuller. I had proved to myself that betrayal and heartbreak weren't the end. They were just a starting line for something better. And that's how I knew this chapter, it's closed. This is my story now, and I'm writing it on my own terms.